Daddy. That one word. That single, small, devastating word, spoken by a child who had no business being in that room, cracked through the silence of the most dangerous banquet hall in all of Seoul, like a thunderbolt splitting open a clear sky. Every conversation died instantly. Every glass stopped midair. 43 of the most feared men in South Korea's criminal underworld turned their heads in the same direction at the exact same moment, and every single pair of eyes landed on the same man, Jae-hyun. His body went rigid. Not from fear. Jae-hyun did not fear men, bullets, or God. But this small voice cutting through the thick, expensive air of Chairman Woo's private banquet, this undid something in him that no blade had ever reached. His jaw locked. His eyes dropped slowly, almost against his will, like a man looking down at a wound he already knew was fatal. And there he was. A boy. 6, maybe 7 years old. Brown skin glowing warm under the cold chandelier light. White shirt untucked. Small sneakers squeaking against marble, so polished it reflected his entire body back at him like a mirror. He was running. Not walking, running. Straight toward Jae-hyun with his arms already open. With the kind of fearless, full-body love that only a child carries. The kind that doesn't know what a room full of killers looks like, because it doesn't need to know. He crashed into Jae-hyun's legs and held on. The room didn't breathe. Jae-hyun's hand hovered in the air above the boy's head, shaking. This man whose hands had never shaken in 23 operations, for years of enforcing Chairman Woo's empire, and one night that nearly broke him completely. Those hands were trembling now, suspended above the head of a child who was squeezing his legs like he had found the one safe place in the entire world. And then the boy looked up, and Jae-hyun saw her. Right there. In the shape of those eyes, in the particular way the boy tilted his head with that quiet, unafraid certainty. He saw the face of the woman he had spent 7 years trying to bury inside himself. The woman whose name he had not spoken aloud since the night a lieutenant appeared at his door at 3 a.m. with downcast eyes and destroyed him in one sentence. Adia. His throat closed. Because Adia was dead. He had been told. He had believed it. He had lived it. Every hollow morning, every mission, he threw himself into like a man, trying to outrun something that lives inside the bones. 7 years of silence. 7 years of a photograph hidden against his chest, right over his heartbeat, because some losses don't heal. They just learn to breathe quietly. And now this child, this impossible, beautiful, terrifying child, was holding on to him in the middle of Chairman Woo's banquet hall, calling him daddy, wearing around his small neck a gold locket that Jae-hyun recognized the way you recognize your own heartbeat. He had clasped that locket around Adia's neck himself. The whispers ignited across the room like a trail of gasoline catching fire. Low, vicious, dangerous whispers that moved from mouth to ear to mouth with the speed of something that could get a man killed before he finished his next drink. Chairman Woo did not whisper. Chairman Woo set his glass down with a softness that was somehow louder than shattering it would have been. He straightened in his chair. And he looked at Jae-hyun the way a man looks at something he thought was loyal, right before he decides to destroy it. Jae-hyun. His voice was silk wrapped around a blade. Is there something you would like to explain to your colleagues? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jae-hyun didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because every functioning part of his mind was colliding with one question that was growing louder and more violent by the second. A question so enormous it was swallowing every other thought whole. If Adia died 7 years ago, whose child is this? And underneath that, darker, quieter, more dangerous, the question he wasn't ready to say out loud even inside his own mind. What if she didn't die at all? Right now, every single one of you needs to understand something. What this child knows, what he is carrying in that locket, and who sent him into that room on this specific night is not an accident. Nothing about this moment is accidental. And the truth, when it finally surfaces, will rewrite everything Jae-hyun, and every one of you, thought was real. Do not move. Do not look away. Because this story is only just catching fire. The boy pulled back just enough to look up at Jae-hyun's face. And what he did next stopped every breath in the room all over again. He reached up, both small hands, and unclasped the locket from around his neck. He held it out. Steady. Patient. Like he had been rehearsed for this exact moment. Like someone had told him, when you find him, give him this. Jae-hyun's fingers closed around the locket. Cold metal. Familiar weight. A scratch along the left edge. He knew that scratch. He had watched it happen on a rain-soaked night in Itaewon when Adia caught the locket against a broken railing and laughed about it. Told him scratches meant it was really hers now. He pressed the locket open with his thumb. Inside, a photograph. Adia. Alive. Recent. Standing in sunlight somewhere he didn't recognize. Holding this same boy on her hip. Both of them laughing at something off camera. Laughing the way people laugh when they feel genuinely, completely safe. The date printed on the back of the photograph in faint ink read 18 months ago. 18 months ago, Adia was alive. 18 months ago, she was laughing. And she had sent her son, their son, directly into the heart of the most dangerous room in Seoul with a message only Jae-hyun would understand. She wasn't just alive. She was watching. The question clawing its way up through Jae-hyun's chest now wasn't how, it was why. Why fake her death? Why 7 years of silence? Why now? Why this room, this night, with these men surrounding him like a closing fist? And somewhere, beneath the grief cracking open inside him like old ice, a colder thought surfaced. Someone in this room knew she was alive. Someone in this room is the reason she ran. His eyes lifted slowly from the photograph and swept across the faces of 43 men who were all watching him with expressions ranging from confusion to hunger to something that looked very much like guilt. One face looked away just a half-second too fast. Jae-hyun filed it, locked it, said nothing, but his jaw tightened in the way that people who knew him had learned to fear. Quiet, controlled, absolute. The tightening that came right before everything around him changed permanently. Chairman Wu rose from his chair. I asked you a question. Chairman Wu had a way of filling a room that had nothing to do with his size. He was not a large man. Average height. Slim build. Silver hair swept back with the kind of precision that said everything about how he operated. Nothing out of place. Ever. Not even by a millimeter. He wore a white suit to his own banquet because white was the color of a man who believed nothing could touch him. Nothing could stain him. He moved through the world like a man who had never once in his life been surprised. Until tonight. He walked toward Jae-hyun slowly. Every step deliberate. The crowd parted without him asking. They always did. Men who had broken bones for this man. Men who had buried secrets for this man. Men who owed this man their entire existence stepped aside like water, finding the path of least resistance. He stopped 3 feet from Jae-hyun. His eyes dropped to the boy still pressed against Jae-hyun's legs. Then back up. Then to the locket in Jae-hyun's closed fist. Something moved behind his eyes, fast, like a fish turning beneath dark water, there and gone before anyone could name it. A child. Chairman Wu's voice was almost gentle, almost warm. In my hall. On my evening. He tilted his head, calling my most trusted enforcer. Daddy. Silence. Jae-hyun. He let the name sit in the air between them. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want you to understand the weight of this question before you answer it. He leaned forward just slightly, just enough. Who is this child? Jae-hyun looked at him. Not with fear. Not with apology. With the flat, unreadable stillness of a man who was doing math behind his eyes at extraordinary speed. Calculating exits. Calculating threats. Calculating which truth in this moment was the most dangerous one to tell. I don't know, Jae-hyun said. It was the most honest lie he had ever told. Because he didn't know. Not completely. Not yet. But the photograph burning in his fist told him enough. Told him that everything he had grieved, everything he had buried, everything he had turned to stone to survive, was not what he had been told it was. And someone in this room had told him. Chairman Wu studied him for a long moment. The kind of moment that has teeth. Then he smiled. And Jae-hyun had seen that smile before, always right before something irreversible happened. Find out, Chairman Wu said softly. Quickly. He turned and walked back to his seat. The crowd sealed closed behind him like he had never moved at all. Conversations restarted. Forced, strained. Too loud in the way of men pretending they hadn't just witnessed something that frightened them. Jae-hyun exhaled once. Slow. Controlled. Then he crouched down. He lowered himself to the boy's level. And up close, the resemblance was devastating. Not just the eyes. The slight furrow between the brows when the boy looked at him seriously. That exact expression of concentrated quiet. Jae-hyun had seen it on Adia's face the first night he told her what he did for a living. The night he expected her to run, and she had sat completely still instead, looking at him like she was reading something written beneath his skin. This boy had her stillness, her fearlessness, her patience in rooms that should have broken him. "What is your name?" Jae-hyun asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. The boy looked at him with those eyes. "Seo." He said it simply, confidently. No hesitation. "My name is Seo." A Korean name. Jae-hyun's chest moved once, involuntarily. "Who brought you here, Seo?" "My mother." He said it like it was obvious. Like it was the simplest fact in the world. "She told me to find you. She said I would know your face." A small pause. She was right. Jae-hyun's throat tightened. "Where is your mother now?" Seo glanced toward the grand doors at the far end of the hall. Just once. Then back to Jae-hyun's face. He said nothing. But that single glance told Jae-hyun everything he needed. She was close. She was here. He straightened slowly, the locket still in his fist, his mind moving now like a current beneath still water. Fast, silent, and pulling everything toward one inevitable point. He kept his face empty, kept his breathing even, kept his eyes from going to the doors, because in this room, where every man was trained to read the smallest movement of another man's body like a survival language, looking toward those doors right now could get a child killed. He reached down and placed one hand on Seo's shoulder. "Stay next to me," he said quietly. "Don't move. Don't speak." Seo nodded, completely calm. 6 years old in a room full of criminals, and completely, unervingly calm. Exactly the way his mother would have been. And that was when Jae-hyun noticed the second thing. Across the room, half hidden behind the bulk of 2 senior lieutenants, nursing a drink he clearly wasn't tasting, was a man named Park Sung-jin. 48 years old. 22 years in Chairman Woo's organization. The same man who had appeared at Jae-hyun's door at 3 a.m. 7 years ago with downcast eyes. The same man who had told him Adia was dead. Park Sung-jin was not looking at Chairman Woo. Was not looking at Jae-hyun. Was not looking at the boy who had just detonated a grenade in the center of the evening. He was looking at the door, with the expression of a man waiting for something he already knew was coming, and dreading it with every cell in his body. Jae-hyun followed his gaze. The grand doors at the far end of the hall swung open, and the room, for the second time in one evening, stopped breathing completely. She stood in the doorway like she had been carved out of the darkness and sat there deliberately. Tall, still, dressed in black that absorbed the chandelier light and gave nothing back. Her natural hair framed her face in a crown that held itself like it knew exactly what it deserved. Her jaw was set. Her shoulders were back. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging, measuring, dismissing, and then they found Jae-hyun. And they stayed. 7 years. 7 years of silence, of grief, of a photograph against a heartbeat. And she was standing 30 feet away, alive, real, breathing, looking at him like she had rehearsed this moment 10,000 times, and was finally ready to let it happen. Adia. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered against the marble and nobody flinched because nobody in that room could move. Park Sung-jin made a sound, small, involuntary, the sound of a man whose worst nightmare had just walked through a door in a white dress. Chairman Woo's face did something Jae-hyun had never seen it do in 11 years. It went pale. Adia walked into the room. Not rushed. Not afraid. Like she owned every inch of the marble beneath her feet and had simply been waiting for the right moment to collect what was hers. The crowd parted for her the same way it had parted for Chairman Woo, but differently. For Woo, they moved out of submission. For Adia, they moved out of something they couldn't name, something older and more instinctive than fear. She walked until she was in the center of the room, until every eye was on her, until there was nowhere left to hide. Then she looked directly at Chairman Woo, and she smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly. The smile of a woman who had spent 7 years underground, building something in the dark, and had finally surfaced to show everyone what it was. "Good evening, Chairman." Her voice was steady as stone, carrying to every corner of the hall, without her raising it even slightly. "I believe we have some unfinished business." Chairman Woo stared at her. For the first time in 22 years, he had nothing to say. And across the room, Jae-hyun felt Seo's small hand find his, fingers wrapping around 2 of his, holding quietly, holding surely, and something cracked open in the center of his chest that all his years of stone and silence had never been able to reach. He looked down at the boy. Seo was looking up at his mother with a pride so pure, it was almost painful to witness. Jae-hyun looked back up at Adia. She hadn't looked away from Chairman Woo. But in his peripheral vision, without turning, without breaking her composure by a single fraction, she reached her hand out to her side, palm open, fingers spread. Toward Jae-hyun. Toward both of them. Come. Jae-hyun didn't move toward her hand. Not yet. Because in this room, with 43 sets of eyes burning into his back, with Chairman Woo's silence filling the air like pressure before an explosion, with Park Sung-jin visibly unraveling at the edges, moving toward Adia right now was the same as painting a target on all three of them. He had not survived 11 years in this world by letting his heart move faster than his mind. But God, his heart was moving. It was slamming against his ribs with a violence that frightened him more than anything in this room. More than the armed men stationed at every exit. More than the cold calculation returning to Chairman Woo's eyes. More than the weight of everything he still didn't understand about this night. 7 years. He had taught himself not to want her back. Had constructed an entire architecture of survival around the absence of her. Stone walls, locked doors, silence where her name used to live. And now she was standing 30 feet away, breathing, real, carrying herself like a woman who had used every single one of those 7 years as a weapon. He kept his face empty, kept his hand at his side. But his fingers, just barely, just once, brushed the top of Seo's head. The boy leaned into it without looking up. Like he knew. Like he had always known this man would be safe. Adia's outstretched hand closed slowly. She didn't look at Jae-hyun. Didn't react. She simply recalibrated. One breath, invisible to everyone else in the room, and kept her eyes on Chairman Woo like a scope that had found its target and would not be moved. You look like you've seen a ghost, Chairman, she said. Her voice didn't waver. Didn't perform. It landed with the weight of a woman who had rehearsed nothing because she needed to rehearse nothing. She had lived every word she was about to say. Chairman Woo found himself again. Slowly. The color returned to his face in stages, and with it came something far more dangerous than shock. Control. He straightened his jacket. Once. Precisely. And when he spoke, his voice had returned to that silk-wrapped blade register that had ended careers and lives with equal casualness. Adia. He said her name like a man identifying a problem. I must say, you are either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily foolish to walk into this room. Or, she said, I know something you don't. A beat. Several things, actually. The temperature in the room dropped. Park Sung-jin put his glass down on a nearby table with a small click that sounded, in that silence, like a gunshot. His hands were not steady. Jae-hyun watched him from the corner of his eye, watched the sweat beginning at his temple, watched his jaw working silently around words he couldn't find the courage to say, and felt something cold and clarifying move through him. Park had known. Not just that Adia was alive. More than that. The specific terror on Park Sung-jin's face was not the terror of a man who had told a lie that was now being exposed. It was the terror of a man who understood exactly what Adia's presence in this room meant for him, which meant he knew what she had been doing for 7 years. He had been watching her, or someone had been watching her for him. Jae-hyun filed it, locked it, said nothing. Adia reached into the inside of her jacket, slowly, deliberately, making sure every armed man in the room could see her hands clearly, and produced a single envelope. Black. Sealed. She held it up between 2 fingers like a card she had been waiting years to play. 7 years ago, she began, her voice lifting just enough to reach every corner of the room. I was given a choice. Disappear, or be disappeared. She turned the envelope slowly. The order came from inside this organization. From someone Chairman Woo trusted completely. She paused. From someone all of you trust completely. The whispers came back. Darker this time. Angrier. Chairman Woo's eyes flicked, involuntarily, toward Park Sung-jin. And that was all Adia needed. You already know, she said, looking at Woo now with something close to pity. You've known for longer than you've admitted to yourself. You just needed someone to walk through that door and make it impossible to keep pretending. Chairman Woo's jaw tightened. That envelope, he said quietly, does not leave this room. 43 copies do, Adia said simply. 1 for every man in this hall. Delivered to their private addresses the moment I walked through that door. Triggered automatically. You have about, she glanced at the slim watch on her wrist, for minutes before they arrive. The room erupted. Not in sound, in movement. Men shifting, reaching for phones, exchanging looks that carried entire conversations in a single glance. The careful, civilized architecture of the evening collapsed all at once, and underneath it was the raw, animal panic of powerful men who suddenly understood they were not the ones holding the board. Chairman Wu stood completely still in the center of all of it, looking at Adia. And for the very first time in 11 years of watching this man operate, Jae-hyun saw something in Chairman Wu's eyes that he had never seen there before. Fear. Real fear. Not the performed, weaponized version he used on subordinates. The genuine article. The fear of a man watching the ground open beneath his feet and realizing there is nothing to grab onto. Jae-hyun moved. He closed the distance between himself and Seo in one step, placing himself between the boy and the nearest armed guard. And the guard, reading something in Jae-hyun's posture that activated every survival instinct he had, took a half step back without being told to. Adia's eyes found Jae-hyun's for the first time since she walked through those doors. Up close. God. Up close she was the same and completely different all at once. Same eyes. Same stillness. But 7 years of living in the dark had added something to her face. Not age, not hardness exactly. Depth. The depth of a woman who had looked at the worst possible version of her life and decided to build something extraordinary out of it anyway. She looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, without a single word, she told him everything. That she was sorry. That she had no choice. That every day of 7 years she had carried the weight of what leaving him had cost. That Seo was his. That she needed him to hold it together for 60 more seconds before he felt any of it. He read every word. Not at once. Barely visible. She turned back to Chairman Wu. Here is what happens now, she said. You are going to sit down. You are going to listen. And you are going to understand that the only path out of tonight that doesn't end in complete destruction, for you, for everyone in this room, runs directly through me. Chairman Wu looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Park Sung-jin. Park Sung-jin could not meet his eyes. And that small, damning, irreversible failure to meet his eyes, was the confession that words never needed to complete. Chairman Wu's expression didn't change. But his right hand, almost imperceptibly, moved toward the inside of his jacket. This is the moment everything was building toward. Not the revelation. Not the reunion. This, right here. This hand moving toward a jacket in a room full of witnesses and evidence, and a woman who planned for every single contingency, except one. What did Adia forget to plan for? What does Chairman Wu know about her that she doesn't know he knows? Jae-hyun saw the hand move. His body responded before his mind finished processing. 11 years of muscle memory, of reading rooms, of surviving by acting in the half second before intention became action. He stepped in front of Adia. Not dramatically. Not with any announcement. Just there. Between her and Chairman Wu, with his back straight and his hands visible, and his eyes locked on the chairman with an expression that said everything a man in his position ever needed to say. Not her. Not tonight. Not while I'm breathing. The room held. Seo pressed himself against the back of Jae-hyun's leg, small hands gripping the fabric of his suit, and said nothing. Didn't cry. Didn't shake. Just held on, the way his mother had taught him to hold on, with quiet and certainty and the deep knowledge that the person in front of him would not fall. Chairman Wu's hand stilled inside his jacket. He looked at Jae-hyun, at Adia, at the boy pressed behind Jae-hyun's legs like a heartbeat against the back of a man who had just, in one wordless movement, chosen a side that could not be unchosen. And then Chairman Wu did something that made every hair on every arm in that room stand up. He smiled. Wide. Slow. Wrong. Oh, Jae-hyun, he said softly, almost tenderly. You have no idea what she did to get here tonight. The smile didn't leave his face. Ask her, he said. Ask her what she traded. Ask her whose blood is on her hands that she hasn't told you about yet. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Jae-hyun had ever heard. He didn't turn around. But behind him, just barely, just once, he felt Adia's breath catch. Jae-hyun didn't move. Didn't turn around. Didn't give Chairman Wu the satisfaction of watching him crack in real time. Because that was what this was. Not a revelation. Not a confession. A weapon, deployed with surgical precision by a man who had spent decades learning exactly where to cut to make the deepest wound. But the silence behind him was doing things to his chest that no blade ever had. Because Adia hadn't denied it. In 7 years of knowing her, in every memory he had held like sacred objects in the dark, Adia had never once been silent when she had nothing to hide. Her silence had always meant the same thing. Always. It meant there was something to hide. Ask her, Chairman Wu said again, softer this time, almost compassionate, the way a surgeon sounds right before he cuts. Ask her about the night she left Seoul. Ask her what she gave up, and who she gave it to buy her disappearance. Jae-hyun turned around. Slowly. The way a man turns when he already knows the view is going to cost him something permanent. Adia was looking at him. And there it was, beneath the composure, beneath the 7 years of armor she had built and polished and lived inside, a fracture. Small. Real. The fracture of a woman standing at the exact moment she had been dreading since the night she made the decision that created it. Jae-hyun, she started. Tell me, he said quietly. Just that. No anger in it. No performance. Just 2 words carrying the full weight of 11 years of knowing each other, and 7 years of silence, and 1 night that split their lives into before and after. Adia closed her eyes for 1 second. Open them. I made a deal, she said. The room, which had been collectively holding its breath since Chairman Wu smiled, tightened further. Men who had seen extraordinary things in this world leaned infinitesimally forward. 7 years ago, when Park Sung-jin came to me with the order, disappear or be disappeared, I had 48 hours. Her voice was steady but stripped of everything decorative now. Just the truth, bare and load-bearing. I was 3 months pregnant. I had no network, no resources, no leverage. A pause. Except one thing. Jae-hyun waited. I knew about the Incheon shipment, she said. The temperature in the room didn't drop this time. It collapsed. 3 senior lieutenants exchanged a look so fast and so loaded it could have started a war. The Incheon shipment, 4 years before tonight, had been the single largest operation Chairman Wu had ever run. 12 billion won moving through a ghost network that not 5 people alive were supposed to know existed. Its exposure would still, dismantle everything Chairman Wu had built across 3 decades. How Adia knew about it was a question that had an answer Jae-hyun was not prepared to hear. He heard it anyway. I knew, Adia said, looking directly at him now, letting him see all of it, because you told me. One night. You didn't give me details, you would never have done that deliberately. But you said enough. A name. A port. A date. Her jaw tightened. I stored it. I never planned to use it. But when they came for me, when I had 8 weeks before I would be showing, and a man at my door telling me I had 48 hours, I used what I had. Jae-hyun heard what she wasn't saying underneath what she was saying. She had used something he told her. Something said in the dark, in the careless, honest intimacy of a man who trusted a woman completely. And she had traded it. Not to an enemy, not to a rival organization, but to a man who could make her disappear safely. A fixer. Someone outside Chairman Wu's reach who specialized in making people untraceable in exchange for currency that wasn't money. She had bought her life, and Seo's life, with a secret that wasn't fully hers to spend. Jae-hyun stood completely still. The math was brutal, and he was doing all of it at once. She had done the only thing available to her. She had been pregnant, alone, hunted, with 48 hours. She had used the one piece of leverage she possessed. She had survived. She had raised their son in secret, built a network from nothing, gathered evidence against Chairman Wu for 7 years, and walked back through that door tonight with enough ammunition to end him completely. She had done all of it. She had also used him to do it. The fixer, Jae-hyun said. Who was it? Adia held his gaze. My uncle, she said. He runs a network out of Lagos. Nobody Chairman Wu can touch. Nobody who would sell me back. A breath. He kept Seo and me safe for 7 years. In exchange for the information, and my agreement that when I came back, I would come back with enough to finish Wu completely, so the information could never be traced back to him. Silence. So tonight, Jae-hyun said slowly, is not just your return. Tonight, Adia said, is the delivery. She looked at Chairman Wu. Everything I have built for 7 years, every document, every recorded conversation, every financial trail you thought was buried, is in that envelope. Copies to every man in this room. Copies to 3 investigative journalists. Copies to 2 prosecutors who are not on your payroll. She tilted her head. You have about 90 seconds before this building becomes the most documented crime scene in South Korean history. Chairman Woo looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at Jae-hyun, and Jae-hyun saw it. The last calculation of a man who had run out of moves, but still had one card left. The most dangerous kind of man in the world. Not the powerful ones. Not the prepared ones. The cornered ones. Kill them, Chairman Woo said. Quietly. Almost sadly. Like a man ordering dinner. Everything happened at once. 3 guards moved, and Jae-hyun was already moving, placing himself in front of Adia and Seo with the absolute instinctive certainty of a man who had made his choice and would not be revisiting it under any circumstances. His hand closed around the wrist of the first guard before the man's arm had fully extended, twisted, controlled. The guard went down without a sound. The second guard stopped, because every other man in that room had also moved. Not toward Jae-hyun, away from Chairman Woo. One by one, senior lieutenants, enforcers, men who had built their entire lives inside this organization, stepping back, creating distance. Because the envelopes had arrived. Because phones were lighting up across the room with confirmations from home addresses. Because 43 men were doing the same calculation simultaneously and arriving at the same answer. Woo was finished. And the fastest way to survive the end of an empire was to not be standing next to it when it fell. Park Sung-jin sat down heavily in a chair and put his face in his hands. Chairman Woo stood alone in the center of the room. The crowd that had parted for him all evening now a wall of turned backs. And for the first time, he looked exactly like what he had always been underneath the white suit and the weaponized voice. An old man who had confused fear with loyalty his entire life and was only now, at the very end, understanding the difference. He looked at Adia one last time. She looked back at him without hatred, without triumph, with something quieter and more final than either. Closure. It's over, Chairman, she said gently. He straightened his jacket. Once. Precisely. And then, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he had built, Chairman Woo sat down, folded his hands on the table in front of him, and waited for what was coming with the only thing he had left. His dignity. Jae-hyun found Adia in the corridor outside the hall 20 minutes later, after the calls had been made and the men had scattered, and the building had begun its transformation into exactly what she had promised. Seo was asleep against her shoulder, worn out from the impossible weight of the night, breathing slow and deep the way children breathe when they feel completely, unconditionally safe. Jae-hyun stood in front of her. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. There was too much. And also, somehow, the most important things had already been said in that room without words. In a photograph against a heartbeat. In a child's hand finding 2 fingers and holding on. In a man stepping between a woman and a gun without pausing to decide. I'm sorry, Adia said finally. Quietly. For the way I did it. For what I used. For the 7 years. Her voice broke. Just slightly. Just once. On the last 2 words. I had no other way. Jae-hyun looked at her. At the woman who had survived the unsurvivable, who had raised their son alone in a foreign country while building a case that dismantled a criminal empire from the inside out, who had walked back through the most dangerous door available to her because she refused to let the man who ordered her death continue drawing breath in the same world as her child. He reached out. His hand found the side of her face. Careful, careful. Like something he had handled in imagination so many times that touching the real thing required extraordinary gentleness. Adia closed her eyes. Seo stirred slightly between them, made a small sound, and then settled back into sleep with the profound, untroubled peace of a child who had completed the mission his mother had given him and could finally rest. Jae-hyun exhaled. 7 years of stone. 7 years of locked doors and silence, and a photograph over a heartbeat. Dissolving. You came back, he said. It wasn't an absolution. It wasn't a full forgiveness. That would take time and honesty and long difficult conversations in rooms that weren't filled with armed men. But it was the truth. The first truth. The one everything else would eventually be built on. She came back. I came back, she said. He dropped his forehead to hers. Seo slept between them, one small hand still loosely curled, still holding on, even in sleep, with the certainty of a child who had always known, on some level beneath language, that this moment was always going to come, that they were always going to find their way back to each other, that some things, even buried, even silenced, even swallowed by 7 years of darkness, do not die. They just wait. Outside the building, Seoul hummed and glittered and breathed, indifferent and magnificent. The way cities are, carrying 10 million lives in its current without pausing for any single one of them. But in a corridor lit by the cold light of a chandelier's afterglow, a man, a woman, and a sleeping boy stood with their foreheads touching. And the war, for tonight, for this one extraordinary night, was finally, completely over. The city outside had no idea. It never does. But somewhere, 3 blocks away, watching the building from the shadow of an unmarked car, a phone buzzed. A single message. No name. No number. For words. She found him. Move. The car pulled away from the curb. Into the city. Into the dark. And just like that, the story you thought was ending has only just revealed its deepest layer. Because the man who ordered Adia's disappearance 7 years ago was never Chairman Wu. Wu was just the instrument. Someone else held the hand. And that someone just gave the order to move. That's a wrap on tonight's story. And if your heart is full and your mind is racing, then this story did exactly what it was supposed to do. If this story moved you, if it kept you locked in from that very first daddy to this final forward message in the dark, then do this right now. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that hits this deep. Smash that like button. It takes 1 second and it means everything. Turn on your notification bell because the next chapter of this story is coming and you cannot afford to miss it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell us, did you trust Adia? Did you see that ending coming? Who do you think sent that message? Share this video with someone you love, someone who deserves a story that makes them feel something real. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying until the very last word. You didn't just watch a story tonight. You lived one. We'll see you in the next one. Don't be late.